They are who they are. But who, nonetheless, they are embraced in the context of a country where ultimately, irrespective of these differences, we're all trying to dream the same dreams together. Ultimately, if you want to create a better India, everyone's got to be part of that quest, and that's precisely what I have tried hard to do, that whatever the differences we have of caste, of creed, of color, of culture, of conviction, of language that is consonant, of cuisine, of costume and custom, we still rally around a simple consensus. And that consensus is on the basic democratic idea that in a vast, diverse country like India, you don't really need to agree all the time, so long as you will agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. That is basically the structure that we have built up and preserved for 7 decades, trying to manage our differences in one embrace, and if that is divided and damaged, it will, in my view, cause enormous damage to India. But I'll be happy to listen to Suresh and then perhaps respond in greater detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Tharoor Saab. Thank you so much. Suresh sir, your opening statements, what is it that you feel is genuinely the idea of India?
Good morning, friends. Wish you a very happy Independence Day. And thank you, my dear friend and colleague Shashi Tharoorji, for giving his own views on this particular issue. I was just looking at a screen there, and it said rule of the debate. So I didn't know we had to really debate the idea of India.
I'm sorry?
Is it really necessary to debate the idea of India? I don't think so. Because the idea of India, before that, because you were talking about rules, I'm sorry I have to leave at about 10:30 because there is a call, which I told yesterday only, so I was saying if you can prepone it, but I will have to leave at 10:30, so don't mind that. India, Bharat has evolved over a period of time. Until the agriculture revolution, we had only wandering people on the planet. When we had the agriculture revolution, people started settling down. When they settled down, now it's whether agriculture caused them to settle down, because that's the beginning of the agriculture revolution, or they settled down and then they started agriculture. Probably the agriculture caused the tribes were moving around to settle down in one particular place. When they settled down, some of them started developing the culture around them. And India, of course, that particular time there was no borders of India as we think it today. But the idea of India is not just confined to the borders of India, because the borders have changed. Here is General Malik, who must have fought the war, and he has seen to defend those borders. But there are many Indians who have defended the idea of India, irrespective of fact where they are living. Because the idea has to germinate in the minds of people. And that's how, since then, we can proudly say we are probably the longest living civilization. Of course, he's a real historian. He has done some very good book on what happened after the Britishers came and how much we lost. Despite several aggressions, and several different people came, not just to conquer, but to probably loot India in different forms, the idea of India remained intact. The civilization has survived despite so many different aggressions. And I am sure today evening when we'll hear the RSS chief, which he keeps saying this too often, that idea of India has nothing to do with the way people worship. There are different ways people worship differently. It has nothing to do with eating habits of Indians. It is something beyond it. And as we have seen in many parts of the world, the culture dominates the faith. People always feel I have to protect my culture. And therefore we have seen some countries fighting wars despite the fact that they believe in the same faith. They practice the same faith because they wanted to protect their own culture. So the idea of India is related to the culture, to the civilizational values, to the kind of life we have lived in so many years. And I would not say that the idea of India got altered in 1947 or should any time get altered in the years ahead. Because that's an idea which has survived for so many decades, so many centuries. And therefore I am sure each one of us have a right to have different opinion. We must have. In fact, each individual is born with a completely different DNA. And the way his upbringing happens, the thought process changes. But that doesn't mean the difference of opinion would mean that we are deviating from the idea of India. The idea of India, idea of Bharat, idea of our civilization is far, far more stronger, and each one of us practice it in our own way. Collectively, we have a responsibility. Because I was talking about pre-agriculture revolution, there was no need for coming out with the rules of how we should, this is a rule of debate, but there was no need to decide the rules of how we should live together. Because we are not individuals, we are all moving on our own ways. But when we decided to settle down, the societies had to have some governing rules to avoid chaos. And those governing rules are the ones in some, not most of the countries, are enshrined in their constitutions. And those working rules will govern the functioning of society. We put upon the responsibility on the citizens of a particular country, in case of us, India, as to what we should be doing. And different governments at different points of time will certainly like to make the policies in the framework of the Constitution. And that's how the people elect them. Every election is preceded by the political parties coming out with their own manifestos, their own programs. And people vote for those programs. If a government which is formed after the election does not pursue those programs, it is actually vitiating the mandate for which the government has been elected. So government pursue their programs, but each of the government has the right to pursue their program within the framework of the Constitution. And therefore, and there is Supreme Court, or there are high courts, there is a judiciary, which will ensure that any action, executive action on behalf of the government, made by the government, has to be in consonance with these constitutional values. And as sometime back, even the Supreme Court had to say that there are certain basic principles of Constitution which even cannot be amended by the Parliament. So those are the basic principles. When the Constituent Assembly met to decide the Constitution for India, what was the guiding principle for those great framers of the Constitution? They went by this idea of India. They wanted to find out how they can articulate the idea of India into codifying the Constitution. And therefore, those fundamental principles are the idea of India, which, as I said, cannot even be violated by anybody, even by the Parliament to some extent. And therefore, that idea of India is so strong, has been evaluated many times, has faced so many challenges, but not only survived, despite the aggression. When the foreign conquest happened, they were trying to destroy this very idea of India, but they never succeeded. So how can now, when we have survived and now we are independent nation for last 75 years, how can anybody defeat that idea of India? it's not possible. Because it is in the minds of people. It may be in the constitution, but more importantly, it's part of India's ethos, thought process, collective thought process. And therefore I said individuals have a right to differ. But they differ on certain aspects of how they should be living life. And it always happens, as it has happened in the human history, that we'll keep changing all the time. But there are certain issues which never change, and that's the idea of India. And therefore I really happy, and therefore I don't think there is a need to debate the idea of India. It is something beyond it, and I think therefore I am very happy by putting this probably discussion between me and my illustrious colleague. We are only trying to re-emphasize that we have an idea which can never be challenged by anybody. And therefore, I'm really happy that we will follow this. I'm very happy that my young friends, it is now your responsibility to take this idea forward. As I said, several thousands of years it has survived, so I'm sure it will survive for all the time. But you must keep taking it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Suresh, but I'd like to both agree and disagree with you. I agree with the idea that there is a civilizational construct of India going back, if you like, to the Rig Veda, the whole notion of Bharatvarsh, the Himalayas and the oceans, bounding this vast country. But the civilizational construct was never challenged by those I've been talking about. For example, I often recount the story of how in the 19th century, when a united Italy was created out of a mosaic of principalities and statelets, a famous Italian writer and nationalist, Massimo Tapparelli d'Azeglio, wrote, "We have created Italy, now all we have to do is to create Italians." Now that kind of sentiment was never needed to be expressed in India. No Indian nationalist said that we need to create Indians, because the idea that India and Indians existed forever, for millennia, before our freedom struggle gave a 20th century expression to their longings, that idea was not in debate. So there I agree with Suresh. But I disagree that this idea is not contested, because when the Constitution was being debated and written, and indeed in the freedom struggle that preceded it, there was a different idea. And when the Constitution was announced, it was rejected by the votaries of Hindutva, rejected by Savarkar, rejected by Mr. Bhagwat's predecessor, M.S. Golwalkar, who was the longest-serving head of the RSS, and subsequently by the first secretary of the BJP's forerunner organization, the Jan Sangh, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, and they all made essentially the same argument, that the problem is with the idea of India and the Constitution. They said this Constitution is wrong because it assumes that India is a territory called India and is written for all the people on it. Wrong, they said, a nation is not a territory, it is a people, and the people of India are the Hindu people, and therefore the Constitution should have been written for a Hindu Rashtra. This is an established approach on their part, which has existed in their writings and speeches for many, many decades. And to my mind, that does violence to the idea of India, because once you say that only Hindus are first-class citizens and everybody else is either a guest or an interloper, a bandit coming into our country, then you have a fundamental problem with keeping this idea of India, of a united, inclusive India afloat. So my answer to you, Suresh, is that we are both on the same page when it comes to the civilizational concept of India, but in that civilizational concept, there has to be room, because for 2,000 years or 3,000 years of recorded history, people from all sorts of backgrounds have come into our soil, merged with us, become us, and we cannot wish them away and imagine some sort of pristine Hindu past, which arguably never existed.
You know, we have a very distinguished diplomat who served in many countries. He's here, and he's an advisor to this great organization. He has traveled, of course, like you. He was in the United Nations, he has probably traveled more. I traveled only to 100 countries and more, not more. He probably has traveled to 200 countries. When you go to different countries, our identity, people will say, "Oh, you are from Hindustan," particularly in our neighborhood, not neighborhood when I'm saying
The Gulf
Bangladesh
countries,
and
yeah.
Pakistan, because the neighborhood is changed now. It is, but say Middle East now, which is called as Middle East. So again, those maps are also artificially drawn. But nearer to, they will say, oh, you are a Hindustan. Okay, so you are Hindu. So that's an identity of a person when they claim, when they see that you are from this particular geography. So India's is a name which evolved little later, but India's this particular geography that now we are our nation and we are very protective about our own map and our identity in that sense. But our identity is therefore those who are coming from Hindustan are Hindus. And therefore, the concept of Hindu is much, much broader than just a faith or related to one practice of what people practice. This is something I feel is a very, very important aspect of our identity. And therefore, each one of us have a right to practice their own faith. There is nothing wrong. In fact, if you don't do that,
They're early.
I'm sorry. If you don't do that, that means you are not actually following the idea of India. See, there are many religions which have been born much after the Sanatan Dharma which was practiced in this part of the world. Many. In fact, incidentally, this part of the world, not just Indian borders, say Asia, for example, has given birth to most of the religions of the world. But all those religions, some of them, if not all, were born much later, particularly those which are practiced in India. I'll join. I'm joining.
Actually, I can reinforce what Suresh was saying on.
So I feel therefore that we have to respect all the religions, have to respect. You know, I give this example to people, and this is, sorry I had to go, but I'll just send my last this. This is the example I give it to people. I always tell people, which each one of you will agree, if you ask a child, who is the most beautiful woman, he will say obviously his mother. Of course, my wife is not here, so I can say that. Otherwise, I'll have to say my wife. So everybody will say my mother. So that means everybody is right. But that doesn't mean that everybody is right in absolute term, because you cannot have so many, all women in the world cannot be most beautiful woman in the world. There has to be somebody who is more beautiful than other. But when we say that, it is also truth. That I believe my mother is the best looking woman doesn't mean that I am saying your mother is not as good looking as my mother. So that's a religion. When I'm saying my religion is the best doesn't mean I have to run down the other religion. I can always, as I respect my mother, I have to respect other mother, I am respecting motherhood. So if I am really a good religious person believing in my own faith, it becomes my bounden responsibility to respect others' faith. And therefore, I sincerely feel that there should not be any conflict between people, and in this country, most of the people, majority of the people, pursue a particular faith, the majority community. That doesn't mean that we cannot allow others to practice their own faith. See, today we have some known religions. It's always possible, like the Baha'is religion or somebody's other religion will be born after some time. And maybe born in India, because India is a place where it has allowed so many different thought processes to prosper. Does it mean that a new religion, we can say it's false? It cannot be done like that. And therefore, I think we should pursue our identity, as I said in the beginning, as will be identified by people. You are from Hindustan, you will be Hindu. If you go to Afghanistan, people will say, "Aap Hindu hai kya?" They will speak in Pushtu, which I will not understand, though I gone to Afghanistan as well. But I am saying, therefore, let no conflict. I am really thankful to all of you for being patient, and really thankful to a distinguished colleague of mine in the parliament. And also, he wears many hats, and he has done extremely well. He would have contested the election for the UN Secretary General. I wish he had become one. But this was no reflection on him. That was actually politics of the Security Council. Otherwise, he would have been the most ideal candidate to do that. But I am very happy that I could share dais with him. I'm really sorry. I had to go because there is a call. So we came a little later, sorry about it. That's why I told yesterday Rishabh that can we prepone it so I can leave at 10:30. But I'm really sorry about it. But really, thank you very much. As I said, nobody can run away from idea of India, so I am not running away from that idea. I'm just going for a meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suresh.
Thank you, Suresh, sir. Thank you so much, so beautifully, so simply expressed.
I think in all fairness, there's no real disagreement between Suresh and me. I think we are on the same page. There is, however, a contest about what the idea of India is, and that's what I was trying to summarize. But everything that he said, particularly in his last answer, who can disagree with? He's quite right. And in fact, I've written in my book about how this whole business of the idea of India in the eyes of foreigners goes way before 1947. That even Maulana Azad has written about how Indian Muslims going on the Hajj, whether they were from what is today in Pakistan, the northwest frontier, whether they're from Tamil Nadu, when they came as Muslims to the Hajj, the Arabs called them Hindis. They were from Hind. There was a recognizable idea of Al-Hind in the eyes of the Arab imagination. So that's fine, but that too is a territorial idea. The problem is with those who reject that territorial idea of Indianness, and we can have that conversation later. I don't know whether we should continue with the audience if the students have questions. I'm
Absolutely,
happy to
absolutely,
respond,
sir. I think we can. And
but
we
I know it'll
definitely-
make it one-sided for some of you.
No, it would be beautiful. We have this fantastic opportunity. Dr. Shashi Tharoor on the stage, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to invite all of you. You'd like to ask a question, sir. If there's anybody who would like to ask a question, please feel free. It's a fantastic opportunity for all of us.
Good morning to everybody.
Morning.
My name is Srinivasan. I'm representing a layman. Happen to be the husband of P.T. Usha, but I too have my own doubts. Since the independence, I'm asking the questions to a walking encyclopedia, so that fear is always in my mind. But sir, since the independence in our country, the minorities enjoying the maximum benefits in the name of the majority. Again, the majorities are suffering their rights in the name of minorities. And the minority and majority differ in the name of a religion. But in our constitution, it is clearly mentioned that secular. This secularism or this secular is divine as per their religion or not. So, what is your actual definition for secularism?
Right. Well, first of all, secularism is actually a misnomer. As I have been writing for 30 years, we misuse the word in India because secularism, if you look up the dictionary, is about distancing yourself from religion. Secularism essentially is irreligious, whereas in India, secularism was the opposite. It was a profusion of religions, that the government would encourage and even support all religions to flourish, but at least the practice was supposed to be that you would not favor any one of them. That was the Indian idea of secularism. But I'll give you, since we have two very distinguished military personnel sitting here, let me give you my example of what I thought was ideal Indian secularism. In 1971, when we had the war with Pakistan, some Pakistani generals were foolish enough to proclaim that it was a jihad against the Hindu unbeliever. They were facing an army headed by a Parsi general, General Manekshaw. The Air Marshal, later Air Chief Marshal in the northern sector, was Air Marshal Latif, a Muslim. The GOC-NC Eastern Command, who commanded the troops that marched into East Pakistan, later Bangladesh, was General Arora, a Sikh. And the general helicopter into Dhaka to negotiate the surrender of the Pakistani forces was Jewish, Major General Jacob. So where is your Hindu infidel that you're having a jihad with? The point is that they were what they were, we are what we are. And what we are, therefore, is an embracing of this sort of diversity, where being Indian, under the Constitution with the rights of citizenship of Indianness, transcends your individual form of worship. Your worship is between you and your maker. It is not the business of the state. That is the fundamental idea of secularism in my mind. And yes, in India, it's pluralism. I know you're from Kerala. I represent Thiruvananthapuram, and if you go to one little corner of the city, you will find this very imposing St. Joseph's Cathedral, large, tall, white building, and diagonally across the road from it is the Palayam Juma Masjid Mosque. And just around the corner is the oldest Ganesh temple, Ganapati temple in Thiruvananthapuram. And they're all literally jostling side by side. I went to high school in Calcutta, had the same experience, where you would actually find the tinkling of the bells at the local mandir practically merging with the loudspeakers outside the Gurudwara reciting verses from the Granth Sahib. The wail of the muezzin calling the Islamic faithful to prayer. And you heard all of that and weren't deafened already. Around the corner was St. Paul's Cathedral. So again, this is the Indian reality. This is how we've all grown up together. And that's what I wanted to celebrate when I speak of the idea of India. I went to school in Bombay. And, you know, my parents were of that nationalist generation that were really proud of Indian freedom and so on. And not once did my parents mention the religion or caste of any of the friends who were coming home to play. It was only when I was much older that I realized that coming to my house in and out and playing and having fun were Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Sikhs, and even a solitary Jew. They'd all come, they were all classmates of mine, and one never thought of them as Muslim or Hindu or Christian. You thought of them as the fat guy or the rich guy or the guy who's good at maths or the fellow who's a good fast bowler, you know. Those were the ways children thought of each other. This consciousness of other kinds of identity is what I find deeply, deeply troubling and divisive in our country. Now, coming back to the question of which you began, this business about the so-called appeasement of the minorities, I know this is a popular perception. But if it were true, our Muslim community would not be disproportionately poor, disproportionately undereducated and even illiterate, disproportionately living in slums, overrepresented in the prison population and underrepresented in the services, in the army, in the IAS, and so on and so forth. So if there had been genuinely the appeasement that many generations of governments have been accused of, then the picture would be the opposite of what it really is today. So I don't agree there was appeasement. I would say that there was definitely a consciousness that efforts must be made to integrate the minorities and not let them feel deprived. We've already been through one partition. We don't want another one. Though right now, thanks to some people who are in positions of power, it seems to me we are going through a partition in the Indian, not in the Indian soil, which we had in 47, but in the Indian soul today. And that needs to be stopped as well by healing and by bringing people together. But if you look at the actual facts and figures, for example, with the Muslim minority, just read the Sachar Commission report. The facts are there and they're pretty damning. So I would say that, that there is a perception. It's assiduously encouraged by a certain political point of view, but the facts and figures don't bear that out. Now, you can have other things you disagree with. Well, I mean, why should you agree with them? I'm vegetarian. I may not be happy about certain eating practices of others. But it's not my business. Gandhiji was asked. You know, Gandhiji was such a great devotee of the holy cow, if you like. He wouldn't even drink cow's milk because he felt the cow was in pain when the cow was milked. So he would drink goat's milk. So Gandhiji was asked, how is it that you are not saying anything against Baqar-Eid or against Muslims eating beef and so on in India? And Gandhiji said, it is not my business what a Muslim consumes. I cannot impose my preferences and my desires on somebody else. I am only accountable for my own behavior. And that, frankly, to my mind, was a very sensible prescription. So I don't eat meat, but I'm not feeling it's my right to tell you not to eat meat or beef or anything else. That's up to you to figure out what you want to do. for yourself. And that kind of attitude of, if you like, live and let live, or you want to call it whatever else you want to call it, that is the most healthy basis for a society, particularly a diverse society like ours, to survive and coexist, where people are free to be themselves. One final thought, Swami Vivekananda very famously told the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. He said, "I'm here proud to speak to you on behalf of a religion that has taught the world not just tolerance but acceptance." And I read that as a teenager, and I've been thinking about it ever since. It's one of the most profound ideas that has affirmed my own faith in my own religion, my own culture. Because when you really think about it, we all go to school and learn that tolerance is a good thing. A tolerant king is a good guy because he tolerates other people's points of view. But if you really think about it, tolerance is a very patronizing idea. It says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in your right to be wrong. But Swami Vivekananda says that's not what Hinduism is about. He says it's about acceptance. And acceptance says, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. And to my mind, that is the perfect basis on which a society like ours can live together and flourish.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the question. I hope you've been satisfactorily answered.
But again, sir, I have, during my college days, I was good in studies. But the authorities refused to give me a scholarship. But in academics below my standard, those who are enjoying the benefit of scholarship. I just asked to my principal, what is wrong with me? So the answer was Mandal Commission.
Ah, yes.
And again, I'm representing a paramilitary group. I joined in CISF as a sub-inspector. While doing my duties, I have near about 60 numbers of good service entries. And when my turn came into a promotion, again I denied in the name of the same
That
thing.
you're not an OBC.
Minority and majority. And in service tribes and all other.
No,
and
OBCs are not minority majority. They are actually the majority. So the Mandal Commission that you mentioned, that's about OBC reservations.
maybe, sir.
So not
Again,
minorities
my
as such. Huh.
Promotion is, what you can say, denied.
I agree.
Till now, I didn't understand what is wrong with me and my representation or my religion, my caste. So how still we hold the religion, caste, creed? Why don't you call as a whole Indian? No Hindu, no Muslim, no Christianity. Can you people, in representing our rights into the parliament, can definition to abolish the religion in our country? We can only call Indian or Hindu.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas. No, I understand where you're coming from. And this is a huge dilemma for which there is no simple answer. When the Constitution was written, there was affirmative action done for the Dalits and the Adivasis, the SC, ST communities. And the feeling was you have to undo 3,000 years of discrimination. You cannot do it without guaranteeing not only opportunities, but outcomes. So in the Western democracies where they have affirmative action, it only guarantees you an opportunity. It doesn't guarantee, there's no reservations for the selection at the end. It's only that you'll have the same chance as everyone else. Whereas in India, we said that's not enough. We actually need to guarantee that X% of seats in colleges, X% of jobs in the government, X% of seats in parliament will be reserved for those communities, so that by getting those positions as a matter of right, they can lift themselves and their communities up. That was the idea, and frankly, I don't think there's much debate about that. That was 1947 to 50, this was all settled. The Mandal Commission came, as you know, about almost 40 years later, 89. And the Mandal Commission report essentially said that one set of people who have been left out have faced economic deprivation, and that is the so-called other backward classes, which were the lower castes in the Hindu society, and they later extended to non-Hindus also, but who, by way of their caste position in society, didn't have the same opportunities as people of the so-called general category. Now here, I wasn't here, I was at the UN, I can't tell you much about the actual debates, but this became very quickly an article of faith amongst the political class. To this day, there is no debate or disagreement on anything to do with OBC reservations. It's all parties support it. And it's partially true, though we don't have any recent census, that the OBCs are probably a larger percentage of the population than is reflected in their positions in government and academia in various other places. And therefore, the argument is that this is the minimum that can be done for the OBC community. Now, it does have consequences for individuals like yourself who don't belong to either SC, ST or OBC, and therefore you feel that your opportunities are narrower and you get left out. And it's very difficult to make public policy of this kind of nature that doesn't hurt somebody. So all I can say is I sympathize with what you have gone through. It's not easy and pleasant. One has to find other solutions. But the policy has been made to try and achieve a larger social good in a society that has been fairly unequal, that has been fairly stratified. It becomes necessary to give people a leg up. Now, there are various discussions still going on. The courts have come up with very interesting observations about all this. There was a judgment, Justice Nariman just retired 2 days ago, by Justice Gogoi and Justice Nariman 6 years ago, the Jat reservation case, in which they argued that birth alone should not determine your eligibility for reservations, that it should only be on the basis of a sophisticated matrix that took into account all your disabilities. So, X number of points if you're a Dalit, X number of points if you're an OBC, X number of points if you are from a family that earns X or Y amount of money, etc. So you carry it all out. The government should devise a table, and on the basis of the total number of points, you then give reservations. That sort of thinking. Government has so far preferred not to do that. There is no such published matrix. Instead, we have other kinds of slicing of the pie. So, for example, there is a 10% reservation passed last year for the economically weaker sections amongst the so-called forward castes. Now, at the end, we're going to end up dicing so much that perhaps we'll end up really finding it impossible to implement. But at the moment, this is the direction that the government has prepared to go, because as I was saying once to a foreigner explaining all of this, reservations are what the Americans call the third rail of Indian power. Third rail is, in America, all these electric subways exist, So you have the two rails on which the train runs, but the electricity runs on a third rail between the two rails. If you touch it, you're electrocuted. So similarly, reservations are the third rail. Indian politicians know if they touch it, they're electrocuted, so they stay away and it carries on like this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shashi.
Thank you. One of the students might have a question.
At the back, I think we have Aman Baldia, who would like to ask a question.
Hello.
Yep.
Okay.
hi.
It's always a pleasure, sir, listening to you. And I don't know whether you recall, in 2013, I had the great pleasure of being your shadow for the first IIMUN event. So it's amazing always listening to you.
Wow.
I just had this twofold question, actually looking at what happened today as well. Do you think it's been seeped from top to bottom in the current establishment of avoiding pressing questions whenever they are put in a situation? Do you think that's something which has been happening? Because a lot of people, like a lot of youth, feels that the questions which should be answered by the current establishment, whether it's the people who are at the very top of the same as well, or in other positions, they're not being answered. We are just being played around the bush. And secondly, sir, do you think you see India ever being able to get itself away from this religion-based politics, like religion-heavy politics? Do you see a future India where we will reach that stage someday?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, I personally, personally have been writing and speaking against not just religion-based politics, but identity-based politics of any sort, whether it's religion, whether it's caste, whether it's region, whether it's language. And I must say there's been some pushback. I mean, for example, I have been attacked for some of my writings on the grounds that it is only people in a position of privilege who can afford to overlook these identity issues that are so real to so many people in their lives. So, for example, when I wrote my book, Why I'm a Hindu, I got some Dalits saying, you know, you can afford to overlook caste. Do you think a Dalit can ever grow up in India being unaware of her caste? And I don't have a good answer to that. So I am against identity-based politics, but it may be presumptuous of me to assume that the same question of identity, which to me doesn't matter to others as well. And for many others, there is a consciousness in their daily lives that who they are by birth, whether it's their caste, whether it's their religion, whatever it may be, somehow limits, delimits, restricts their opportunities in life. And therefore, they have a bit of a chip on the shoulder from their identity, which either manifests itself, perhaps in the old days people tried to conceal their identities. Today it manifests itself in an assertiveness that people of our identity should fight for our rights and should be given benefits along those lines. So the question has to be addressed, going back to your first part, not from a top-down perspective, but from the subaltern perspective, from the perspective of the person at the bottom who feels that their identity is important. Now, I'm not excusing it wholly, because I'm also aware there are a lot of cynical politicians and political operatives who are manipulating identities to promote their own political agenda. Let's not have any illusions about that. But the truth is, it is the genuine feeling of people at the bottom of this identity chain that they feel discriminated against, and therefore they feel the need to assert themselves. So we all know famous cases of political revolutions happening at the ballot box by people recognizing that if they mobilize people of a particular identity, usually it was a caste, but it can also be religion. If they organized people on those lines, they would win elections. So the power of the ballot box gives power to numbers. So you go and say to people of your community, isn't the time people like us were in power? And sure enough, if enough of the community agree with you, you could actually come to power that way. And there are many state governments where the identity issue has changed governments more than once. My argument has been, however, that at the end of the day, identity politics is not enough. It may help you win once, maybe even twice. But after that, people are going to say, listen, this is simply not enough. Bijli kahan hai, sadak kahan hai, pani kahan hai. You know the whole story, that you want governance results, you want performance to judge your government by, and eventually the people who only have identity to offer may lose to those who have something more concrete that will actually help people improve their lives. And that ultimately is my hope, that we will move from a politics of identity to a politics of performance. But it partially depends on all of you, the electorate. If you reward those who perform and punish those whose only message is identity, only then will what I hope turn out to be true. Otherwise, I'm afraid the Hindutva brigade on the one side, or particular caste formations on the other, or whatever, they will continue winning because they keep tom-tomming their identity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Aman. It's been tremendously insightful, sir, and been such a pleasure having you on the stage.
Thank you.
And speaking your heart out. Thank you so much. I would now like to invite on stage Rishabh Shah to felicitate Shashi Tharoor ji.
You're going to give me too many of these now. I won't have room to carry them all.
Thank you, sir. Huge round of applause for Dr. Shashi Tharoor. You want to make an announcement?
All right. I know I'm not the most prettiest face you want to see, but just to tell everyone, we'd like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Nadir Godrej, who's also joined us. Welcome, sir. And secondly, just want to thank Dr. Shashi Tharoor for preparing and articulately, putting out all the statements. I think the questions from the audience was a bit unplanned because we had to cut short because Dr. Prabhu had, an unannounced meeting to attend to. So thank you so much, sir, on behalf of the organization for taking out time, staying through the entire thing, and putting forward your viewpoints. It's always a pleasure to hear from you, and being in the same room, we're all very, very, very fortunate. So thank you very much for blessing the organization right from, I think, back in 2012 and 13, like Aman said. So, and also, since we've gotten done a bit early, we've made a small preparation for all the advisors. So if we can request the team to escort them for quick tea, coffee, and biscuits, and then proceed for the meeting. All right, thank you very much.
So ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the event. From the panel discussion and the debate today, our intention was to understand what is the idea of India. But can it truly be understood? Can it truly have one definition? Or is the relationship between an Indian and India quite like the relationship between man and God? Exclusive and personal. One that varies from individual to individual, quite like the trillions of cells in the human body, each an individual in itself, but collectively working for the growth and well-being of the body as a whole. Maybe that is what unity and diversity truly means. And we are one, aren't we? We are not just Indians, we are India. And as India, let's collectively make a new resolve as we march towards the 76th anniversary of Indian independence. Have a good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ravi Dubey signing off. Thank you so much. See you, brother.
Mic is on.